right, Genesis chapter 40. Genesis chapter 40 is where we are going to be. Again, it's a lot of reading, but it's especially if we get to 41, there's a lot of reading. It's really hard to stop at just any chapter, especially when 42 really gets into the good, even more good stuff. And anyway, but 41 is a long chapter, but it's a lot of reiterating of some things. So, all right, Genesis chapter 40. It says, "And it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was wroth against two of his officers, against the chief of the butlers, and against the chief of bakers. And he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound." Imagine that. Verse 4, "And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in a ward." Now, if you remember, Joseph was put into this position, back into prison, due to, let me make sure, due to the wife saying, am I in the right spot? Yeah. Getting out, he was accused of trying to do certain things, which he did not. But we see that the Lord basically allowed him to be put there. In some ways, you got to remember, though, that the Lord allows you to go through certain things to protect you for certain things. Not only that, but he allowed Joseph to go through these certain things so he can basically go on to the next step that he needs him to go to, which is what we're getting into. And lo and behold, Joseph, people see how good Joseph is, and not only that, but really if the Potiphar, if he would have really done something wrong, if he really thought that he would have done that, he really did what he was accused of, he should have been put to death, but he wasn't. So therefore, that's what people see in Joseph. That's what they see in him so far. So in verse 5, what we see is he was now put in charge, basically put over these ones that have been accused of trying to do something to the Pharaoh. So that's a definitely big no-no, especially when you're talking about the food and the food and the drinks and things like that. So verse 5, "And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning, and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his lord's house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today?" It's amazing how Joseph is in a position where he could be sad as well. He could be in the woe pittiness of himself, but he looks at others and says, "Why are you sad? What's going on?" Verse 8, "And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you." Again, as we get into the thought of dreams and things like that, a lot of people try to look into the dreams and see if God has anything to mean by it. Number one, if anything goes against God's word, it's definitely not of God. Number two, God doesn't really use the dreams like he used to because we have the Bible. So there you go. Basically, sometimes it's just a dream, all right? And don't take it any further than that. Verse 9, "And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph, and said to him, In my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and dressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head, and restore thee unto thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, after the former manner when thou wast his butler. But think ye on me, when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. So, Joseph here interprets a dream, but not only that, but if someone, an interpreter at that time, if one was to interpret that, they would, if they may worry about whether it's real or not, they would definitely give a longer time span in some ways. But Joseph didn't have any problem with giving 3 days in it. That's what the interpretation of the dream was. So therefore, if what he said is true, it's really going to happen in 3 days. So, but he also goes to say to the one that's going to live, remember me. Please remember me, and not only that, but please put in a good word back for me. That way I can basically be taken out of this place. But I'm leaving it in your hands, in other words. Verse 16, when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. And in the uttermost basket there was an all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Now, the baker at this moment, thinking, surely this won't be that bad. I mean, after all, he said that the butler is going to be raised back up, but basically what's happening is one was the bad person and one was the good person. And yet anyway, verse 19, yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the bird shall eat thy flesh from off thee. What a day. I have 3 days left, if this man's telling me the truth. Verse 20, and it came to pass the 3rd day that which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants, and restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgat him. Imagine that. Yet again, Joseph gets forgotten. Got to remember, God has a plan through it all. But he does know that Joseph does interpret dreams. And that is something that people definitely took advantage of in that time. May I remind you that he interpreted his own dreams, 2 of them, to his family, and they looked at him like he was crazy and said, you're nuts, because he said, you're going to be bowing down to me. It would not go very well in the family, but it is true what God has allowed Joseph to do. He allows him to interpret dreams. So, he's forgotten again. But in chapter 41, in verse 1, it says, and it came to pass at the end of 2 full years, that's a long time, thinking, when is this butler actually going to say what I told him to? And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine, and fat shed, and they fed in the meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-shed, and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And an ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine, so Pharaoh awoke. Now this was in his dream. And he slept and dreamed the second time, and behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind sprung up after them, and the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears, and Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. That's just weird. That's just a weird dream. Just weird. Anyway, verse 8, and it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and all the wise men thereof, and Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Let's call the people who are magic. Verse 9, then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. God brought the memory back to him. Verse 10, Pharaoh was wroth with his servants, and put me in ward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, and I and he, we dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was there with us a young man, an Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams, to each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself and changed his raiment, and came in unto Pharaoh. Verse 15, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee, that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. Now, there comes a time in our lives whenever we think that God has forgotten about us. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but it seems like sometimes we forget about certain things. But there comes a point when God will allow it to be brought back up, and finally it clicks in your head to be reminded, hey, the Lord has been doing something in the background of all this time. So I just imagine what's going through Joseph's mind right now. Verse 16, and Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me, God, did I start at the right spot? Anyway, verse 16, Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me, God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, in my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river. Now notice there also, Joseph wasn't taking the praise for it, he was also giving it to God. Verse 18, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, fatted flesh, and well-favored, and they fled in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them, poor and very ill-favored, and lean-fleshed, such as I never saw in all the land of Egypt for badness. And the lean and the ill-favored kine did eat up the first 7 fat kine. And when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored. As at the beginning, so I awoke. And I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up in one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 ears withered thin and blasted with the east wind sprung up after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears, and I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it to me. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of the Pharaoh is one, and hath showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. Verse 26, the 7 good kine are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What good is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. So God used a dream at the perfect timing to give to Pharaoh, to allow Joseph to come in, hear the dream, to interpret it, to basically tell the Pharaoh, trouble is about ready to come your way. And in 7 years, you need to be prepared for what's going to happen after the next 7 years. So you need to be prepared for what is about ready to happen, is basically what God is telling you to do. So In verse 3, and there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land, and the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice, it is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. And let him gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. In other words, in the next 7 years, you need to be gathering all your food. You need to have someone over it, putting it up, getting it prepared, because things are going to be getting bad the next 7 years after that. In verse 36, and that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, and that land perish not through the famine. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, Can we find such as one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, For as much as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. It's amazing what God gave to Joseph to be able to allow other people to see, because Joseph allowed God to do the work through him. God is blessing him. Not only that, but because Joseph is being blessed and allowing God to bless him, other people are going to be blessed because of this. It's like we've seen this before. Verse 40, Thou shalt be over my house from a loved brother, or a loved son, hated brother, to a slave, to a right-hand man, to a prisoner, being forgot about, and now he's being put over my house, he says. And according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled, only in the throne will I be greater than thou. He is second in charge. Only God can do what God has done. God is the only one that could have brought Joseph. I mean, if this would be, can you imagine someone telling this to someone else? I mean, there's this man, he was a slave, then after all, basically all these bad things that happened to him, he ended up being second in the land. That just sounds crazy. I mean, if you really think about it and really take Joseph's life and break it down and let other people see it, people wouldn't believe it. It just doesn't sound real. It sounds kind of like a fairy tale, but it's not. It was real. This is really what God did in Joseph's life. Why? Because he honored God, he loved God, and he followed God. And he had patience and listened and all of that. So he's second in command. Verse 41, And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. I wonder what he's thinking in the back of his mind about the dream he had when he was a young man. I wonder what he's thinking. And Pharaoh took of his ring from off his hand and put it upon Joseph's hand, and array him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. It's as though he was his father's favorite son again. He puts a ring on there, and that's a big deal, because if the Pharaoh needed to sign a letter or anything like that, they stamped it with that ring to be able to be the seal, and that seal showed that it was from the Pharaoh. So that gives him much power. He has been put over so much, but all this is in God's plan. Okay, so verse 43, And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, Bow the knee. And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. It's amazing what God can do if we just let God do the work. Sometimes God can't do the work because we step in the way. Verse 44 says, And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphenath Paneah, And he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Another way that God blessed him for him doing what he needed to do, serving him, having patience with God, leaning on God in all of that. Verse 46, and Joseph was 30 years old. Now, when all this started, he was about 17 years old. It's a long time to be staying faithful and staying true. Okay, another good example for us. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. And in the 7 plenteous years the earth brought forth by handfuls. It's important that a man like Joseph is put in this place, in this position. I mean, after all, if you look what he did whenever he was in prison, whenever he was, any moment in his life, he didn't try to take advantage of the situation that he was in or anything like that. He was humble about it, and that's another characteristic that we need to follow. But they had 7 plenteous years. The earth brought forth by handfuls, double crop, double row crop, everything. And he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities, the food of the field which was found about every city, laid he up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, very much, until he left numbering, for it was without number. And unto Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, and Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bare unto him, and Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. For God, said he, for he hath made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. He's putting it all to God. He's giving it all to God, saying, God has done all of this. God has allowed me to go through so much so he can bless me in this way. A blessing beyond all measure. Verse 52, and the name of the second called he Ephraim, for God hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And the 7 years of plenteousness that was in the land of Egypt were ended. And the 7 years of dearth began to come, according as Joseph had said. And the dearth was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, go unto Joseph, what he saith to you, do it. That man knows what he's talking about. Verse 56, and the famine was over all the face of the earth. And Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians, and the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. That is also going to cover people, as it said, over all the earth. It's going to cover people that would be in his family. Verse 57, and all the countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all lands. We see there that God blessed Joseph because of his faithfulness, because of him serving him, because of him being true to him, because of what he has seen. For us, we can look at that and say, you know, that's good that Joseph was able to do that, but I just don't see God being able to bless me like he blessed Joseph. Well, there is a day when God will turn us, and he tells us that we will be joint heirs with him. And there's all kinds of things that God has promised us and that he is going to give us. And we just need to be reminded of that, and we need to be patient with that. But one thing that Joseph did, he continued doing what he was supposed to do. Same way with us. We need to continue doing what we are supposed to do and not giving up, not turning away. Stay faithful to the one who has been faithful to you. Let's all stand as we close with a word of prayer tonight. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the ones that have come out tonight. Thank you for the words you've given to us. Lord, as we just look into the story, Father, and are reminded of the blessings that you give to those that are faithful and true to you, Father. And Lord, for just all the characteristics that we see through Joseph. And not only that, but Lord, there's just so much that we can see in how you bless your people, bless those that honor and serve you, Father. And may we be in the same mind, Lord, not for the blessings, but to know that we need to honor and serve you, Father. I ask you just be with us now as we go our separate way. It's in your blessing we pray. Amen.